Welcome to Unsolicited UX, a podcast full of advice and opinions that you didn't ask for. I'm Jay Keatsman, and each month I'll be sitting down with a professional from the world of UX, product design, and tech to dig into their work, their wins, and their lessons learned, so you don't have to. Whether you're deep in the trenches or just a little UX curious, there's something here for everyone. Check out Unsolicited UX on Substack, Spotify, and YouTube, and enjoy the conversation. Jonathan Brink, welcome to Unsolicited UX.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Could you start by introducing yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Jonathan Brink. I am a design manager at IBM. I have been in UX for about 25 years and have loved every minute of it. UX is my home base. So I currently live just outside of Silicon Valley, outside of San Francisco. And I grew up in Silicon Valley, so I've seen the entire arc of all of technology. I've seen when it was originally peach orchards up to where we have the 5 gargantuan FAANG in our backyard. And I think UX is going to make probably one of the biggest influences in all of business because it does one thing exceptionally well. It focuses on the customer, not the business. And I think if businesses do that, they will always win.
Ooh, I want to talk about that.
Sounds good.
But first, why don't they should have called Silicon Valley the Peach Farms. I like that.
Well, yeah. So San Jose, which is in the south of the Silicon Valley. So the Silicon Valley is a horseshoe that goes all the way up to San Francisco, down San Mateo, Belmont, Burlingame, down to San Jose, through Fremont and up to Oakland. And that's kind of Silicon Valley. But Silicon Valley really started in my backyard. It started with National Semiconductor, which was down in South San Jose. And then we had IBM and HP, which were really the beginnings of that whole ethos of take care of your people, the HP way, things like that, and work out of your garage. All of that happened in my backyard. So it's been an absolute blast watching it grow up.
I did not know that IBM was from Silicon Valley.
No, they're not. They're from New York, but they had a major hub in San Jose and in South San Jose. They used to own a ton of land in South San Jose that had all of their plants. My dad was actually director of West Coast accounting and kind of reorganized all of IBM in the 70s to kind of consolidate. And San Jose stayed a hub, but most of it moved to Austin.
Wow. And so now you work for IBM, right? As a design
I do.
manager.
It's been a wild full circle. So to give you a short story, my last company that I was at, which was StreamSets, we developed data pipelines for major enterprise companies to move data. And we were swallowed by Software AG and out of Germany. And they were swallowed by a private equity firm. And IBM came along and said, we need StreamSets. And so they just swallowed us and we started July 1st as part of an acquisition. So we were brought over into IBM. And so it's weird. I was telling my sister, it's weird going back to the company that my dad worked at for 30 years. You know, he got the gold watch for retiring for 25 years. So it's weird having the badge because the badge at IBM is kind of like the thing. So it's kind of weird working for your dad's company.
And what a different world that your dad lived in, the idea of the gold watch.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, back then, IBM had a policy. They would never fire anybody. So if you were a bad employee, because the idea is if you got in, if you were smart enough to get in, there was something of value there. And IBM would never fire anyone unless it was gross, something highly negligent or you stole, but they would just move people. So they have always had this really people-oriented culture. And although they don't keep people who don't perform anymore, they still are a highly people-centered organization. I love it. I think the culture here is outstanding. So.
And what does it mean to you to be a design manager?
So I have lived virtually all roles in my career. I've been a VP of product. I've been an individual contributor. I have managed teams of 25. I like the people side. So I'm a good designer, but I'm better at figuring out what customers need. Over the 25 years, one of my real strengths is very, very quickly identifying the feature or idea that's going to move the needle, that's going to move revenue. Because UX, apart from any other part of the organization, has the capacity to influence revenue. Because when you take care of your customers' pain points, they're not going to walk away. So research has now shown UX has the largest impact of any part of the organization, even sales, to actually make a difference on revenue, because you're focusing on making the customer happy. That's my job. That's one of the things that I love about it. And I've always been really good at finding that. Now I'm at a point in my career where I'm really interested in helping other people learn how to do that. I love coaching in UX. Um, I love coaching my team members and seeing them light up and become really solid contributors on the team. And it really comes down to, it's not hard. You just have to be really good at empathy. And when you're really good at empathy and listening to the customer, not from your idea first, but from their idea first, because they'll help you get to the best idea because they're the ones experiencing the pain. So I spend a lot of my time now focusing on developing my team members to become better people who know how to listen with empathy. Because if you can listen with empathy and feel their pain, you'll design a great solution, because you can operate from, that's the power of empathy, is to operate from that experience, not just an idea, but an experience of, yeah, that sucks, to go through the process. And they're like, because there's nothing worse than a customer going through your product journey and they get to that point where they should have an aha, go, yes, I love this product, and then they abandon it. Nothing worse than that. Because, and when you have a sales growth spurt and you see it happen, they reach that point and then they drop off. UX's goal is to reach that point and go, aha. And when it happens, when you can go from drop off the cliff a lot to lots of ahas, it is one of the most exhilarating experiences. So my last two companies, I was able to affect revenue by over 10x because we simply listened to the customer. And that's the power of UX, is when you listen to your customer, they will definitely buy your product. You just got to be smart about it.
So, in a perfect world, I think that cross-functional partners would collaborate really well together. Everyone would be driving towards the same goals and things would be merry. But I'm more interested in asking about imperfect scenarios because I think they're more common. So I'm curious, how do you navigate scenarios? Because I mean, I'm biased. I agree with your point around the revenue value of UX. But when it comes to sort of negotiating ownership between maybe UX and product, we'll start there. How do you go about that?
Yeah, what you're talking about is who wins the argument. How do you win arguments? Because there's directions. Go ahead. Sorry.
No. I was going to say that I want to hear that, but I also think part of it is establishing ownership within
here's the thing. UX supports product. So our job is to support what product is doing. I want to lead. So that's why I say it comes down to winning arguments. My goal is to influence heavily from a position of second. So how do I do that? Because product, their job is to create that feature that gives the aha, that launches someone into adoption. That's the whole point of finding the user journey and getting them to that. This is the solution I want to use. To get there, you have to shape the product along a product journey to understand your use case, to do it effectively, to do it simply, and then your customer gets to that point. So how do I influence product? Because I always operate from a perspective of I'm supporting product, and I do that with data. So My first hire is always user research. And I have lived in the startup space, so smaller teams. It's usually me as a designer and a contributor managing a researcher. I use research to my advantage to shape direction as much as humanly possible. And it's always towards what the customer is trying to accomplish. So when I have a conversation with product managers, I will always start with, this is your decision, but here's what the data says. And with the data, I can show that 8 out of 10 people want this feature first. That's what the research shows. And the feature that you want, 3 out of 10. Which do you think is going to affect more revenue? And that's my style, is I don't lead, I follow, because I'm contributing and supporting the product managers. But I do win the arguments because I bring tremendous data to the process to say, because I don't believe in my own opinions at all. I start from, what does the data tell me? So I spend probably 50% of all of our energies are going towards research to understand, what is our customer saying? Are we validating through the entire process? So ultimately, my goal is to heavily shape that direction the company is going, because I believe the data will tell us the way to go, not our opinions. And what I've found is I build a lot of trust with the product team up front to support them, letting them know, hey, I tell my product managers probably every other week, this is your decision. You're the ones. And what it does is it support them because of all the push they get from engineering that want to control it. No, this is products lead. You're the lead. And by supporting them, it creates a culture of trust so that when I present the data, they're already trusting me. So that's a big way that I try and grow the product, is by leading with data. And you're surprised at how many times you can win arguments, not for the sake of winning, but because this is what the customer wants.
It's subtle, but I think I'm going to add, this is your decision, to my repertoire, because I get what I get that. I think that it also gives a level of clarity to the situation, which is important.
Well, I think one of the things that UX has had a hard time with is, really, UX is only about 15 years old as a role. So we've had to fight for our place at the table. I don't do that. I know data tells me, like research, there's so many research organizations that have studied UX now and its impact on revenue. It's automatic. I start with the belief that my role is going to have the greatest impact on revenue. And with that confidence, I trust in the data. I'm not trying to win my opinion, but my assessment is, here's what the data tells me. And that has always won in the past. When we shape it along what the customer wants, they're willing to buy it because they're getting what they need to do their job. And then product usually falls in line because they understand that's the ultimate goal. Now, we do get a couple, every once in a while, I'll get a product manager that kind of likes to do his own thing. And they eventually figure it out pretty quickly that that doesn't increase revenue. Like, you can come up with really great ideas, but most of those are just, I don't want to say from the ego, but they're just not what the customer wanted.
I get the sense that you almost see the role of UX as almost like a consultant as opposed to a partner.
I would call it both, but I think here's my gut instinct. So I've been in Silicon Valley and watching the growth of technology in my backyard for the last 25, 30 years. And I've seen the rise of UX. I fell into UX. I didn't start in UX. I started in marketing and design. So I had my own marketing agency. And my cousin came to me. He was trying to get a .com funded, and he ended up getting $2.3 million. He came to me and said, hey, will you help me raise the money? We did. We got the 2.3 million. We started our company, and I built the product. And for the first time, I was building from an idea of, let's build a prototype. Nobody was doing prototypes. I was just kind of trying to expand, and we would go to our development company because we were outsourcing that part. And people are saying, wow, this is sort of a new way of doing things. So I've seen the entire arc of know UX to around 2010 is when I really think UX started to take off. And I think what happened is there's a wise tale, there's a myth in Silicon Valley about Kleiner Perkins, which is a VC firm, that John Kleiner sent a memo to his organization and said, if you're not hiring UX first, you're already behind the curve, because UX is making the most impact. He understood it early. And I think that was really the birth of UX becoming a formalized role. It had already been deeply embedded in Apple. But over that time, we've had to fight for our place at the table because most technology companies are engineering centric. And engineers have very clear ideas about what they want to create. And it doesn't always align with what the user wants. And so a lot of times what happens is you'll have an engineering centric company. UX will be hired 4 years into it, and they have to clean up a lot of that mess because it's very complex, highly chaotic, rather than simple and easy and intuitive to use. So the growth of UX has been a fascinating journey to watch, because where I think it's going is it's going to become a leader in the company to determine how products are made. I think AI is going to be the perfect UX.
You just brought up something I've discussed with others in the past that I would love your perspective on.
Sure.
So you mentioned this idea of UX being a leader within a company. Do you know of any examples where a UX professional has entered the C-suite of the company? And the reason, I guess,
but I think
the reason why.
Sure, go ahead.
I was going to say, the reason why I ask is because I'm curious if that will have any implications on the way a company is run.
Well, here's my take. At some point, people are going to realize UX has the highest level of impact on revenue. It's already been validated. Like, that idea is already closed. So at what point is UX not the best option to lead? That's my theory. It hasn't happened yet, but I do believe there are a lot of startups that are started by UX people because they're the ones who can do most of the front end work. I'll give you an example. In 2014, I took a job at a company called LiveHive, and I was the lead UX person, lead UX designer. And at the exact same date I got hired, a company was founded called Outreach. And Outreach started with UX. They went and they spent 6 months listening to their customers as much as possible. Now, we already had a finished product, and we were in the exact same space. We were in the sales space, supporting sales teams, specifically SDRs. And Outreach listened to their customers intently. When I got there, we had already had a finished product, so it was hard to morph. At that same time, when I started, I said, we need to shift and pivot to become a more encapsulated product. We agreed. I became the VP of product, and the company shifted. And we started supporting a much more robust solution rather than just a point solution for one action. And Outreach at that time started building their product. So we were in a race together. We didn't even know about them. And when they released, they hit the ground running to such extent they were a market leader in 2 years. And we grew 100%, but because we were out of cash, we ended up having to closing. So it was an awful experience from my perspective, but it was comparison of, here was a company that did it exactly right. And within 2 years, they were a market leader, like a full market leader, highly entrenched. And then they were able to raise hundreds of millions of dollars because they started with UX. They started with this idea of, we need to clearly listen to our customers and include them in the design process. Now, the value of UX is that we are interpreters. The goal isn't to just do what they want or just do what we want, because that's engineering led. Engineering led is, I'm going to do what we think is the smartest solution because we're engineers. That's what we're paid to do. UX is, no, let's include them in that conversation. And most companies now realize the power of that. You've got to include your customer in the conversation. Product now knows that. But when you lead with that, idea that this is we start with the customer, you will always be ahead of the curve. It's just the way and I believe the outcome of that eventually Silicon Valley is realizing UX is where we should always start.
I love that. I want to ask you more questions about that, but
sure,
I'm going to ask you questions about about the early days of Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Because as you mentioned, you were born and raised there, and then you grew up and happened to enter the industry, which from a proximity standpoint makes sense. But how have you seen the industry evolve?
It's been a wild ride, I'll tell you. I grew up in San Jose. At my dad's house, I could throw a stone and hit National Semiconductor, which was the birthplace of Intel. So I think it was around 1975, Intel was started. So then we always had HP and IBM. They were two big technology companies, but technology didn't rule Silicon Valley. It was peach orchards. And really San Jose was Silicon Valley at that time. And life was pretty simple. It was vastly middle class. Everybody went to high school and everybody sometimes had a car. There weren't very many rich people. Los Gatos was this small pocket of wealthy families, Saratoga and Menlo Park. I mean, those were all small communities, but there was no influx of wealth. And right around 1996, real estate started skyrocketing. Like in a 4-year period, my house tripled in value. It was kind of a wild ride. Yeah, it was a wild ride because what was happening is as technology started taking off, VCs started being born to a next level out of Palo Alto, and they were funneling in literally every year another 10 billion. So every year during the dot-com bubble was about 10 billion in revenue coming directly into Silicon Valley. So all of a sudden you had all these employees that were flush with cash. Then Yahoo was the first company that really broke the public sphere. Like, we're going public. And here's what happened. The entire company goes across the street to the BMW dealership and cleared it out. Like, that was what was happening. There was this inertia of all of a sudden you could go public and you could make obscene amounts of wealth. So one day I was playing soccer, and I was in the parking lot getting out of my car, and a friend of mine drove up, and he worked at Yahoo. And he pulls up in a Lamborghini Countach. He's 26 years old. But it was like, what are you doing? But that was this culture shift that happened from this middle-class community all of a sudden discovering this intense amount of wealth. And overnight, I would say probably from about 1998 till about 2004, wealth tripled in value. It was crazy. Everybody was buying new Suburbans. Everybody was, getting their BMW. Everybody was getting a better house or fixing up their house. So overnight, San Jose transformed. It went from just this average middle-class community. We had Santa Cruz over there. We had Lake Tahoe up there. But now everybody has a tremendous amount of wealth. So what was happening is because real estate was going up, everybody had the money in their house to go buy the Suburban. So everybody got Suburbans. And it changed San Jose overnight. And then the crash happened, but it didn't stop technology. As we can see, back then, the Dow was probably at like 7,000. Now it's at 39. So it didn't stop. And I saw my own house triple in value, moved to a suburb, and saw it just hasn't stopped. There's just been this constant grind of more. And I think to a certain extent, the whole Bay Area is completely different than what it used to be. It used to be a lot more average and normal. I want to say normal because we're all abnormal to some extent, but it was just filled with people who were just like us. Now there's huge wealth disparities. San Jose is, I believe, the most multicultural city in the United States. It has like 17 people populations with over 25,000 people. So it's got all these different cultures. And because attracted a ton of talent, especially from India, from China, and all those people came over here looking for the job because this is where all the jobs were. And then real estate just went crazy. So, but what's happened is that we've really perfected the process of building products. And I think that's what I've seen over the last 20 years is this real specific process for building products effectively.
Yeah, okay, that's perfect. Yeah, because I wanted to ask, where was the industry when you entered it? And so maybe can you elaborate on that process and talk about where it was and maybe how it's evolved?
Yeah. So when I entered, Yahoo was sort of the first company that sort of AOL probably was like the attractor that got people online. And then Yahoo was this space where it wasn't just its own portal. Yahoo, you could go anywhere on the internet. So that was really the beginning. And that was really the beginning of people realizing if I go work for a startup and it goes public, I could make a shit ton of money. And so that changed the culture. And it attracted gold miners, really, people that came here because they specifically wanted to join a startup and make a ton of money. And that possibility became very real. There's more millionaires here than, I don't want to say that, that's probably not true, but there are so many millionaires here now because there's such, I mean, at this point, there's over 70 to 80 billion dollars that are funneled into Silicon Valley every year through VCs and private equity because that's where the money goes. It goes where the technology is. And the arc of that was it became a very different place. When you start giving people who don't have money a lot of money, they tend not to use it the smartest way because, like my friend, first thing he bought was a Lamborghini. You know, it was an $85,000 car. Yeah, it's new money, and new money tends to glamorize. A lot of people would buy the key was if you had a Suburban, we knew you were a startup because you had the money. Like, and if you lived in Willow Glen in the middle of San Jose, that's where I live. That's where a lot of the new money bought houses. And, you know, you could afford to have the really killer Suburban with the 2 kids and the picket fence. And it was a perfect world scenario. So there was a lot of glamour to it. There was a lot of, people wanted that lifestyle. And it was fun because when companies make a lot of money, they spend a lot of money on you as employees. You know, you can have the really nice, luxurious offices, but companies like Google took it to a whole nother level and said, okay, how do we keep people working 16 hours a day? Here's what we do. We pick them up on a bus so they have Wi-Fi with a laptop table in front of them so you can work all the way to work. And then when you get to work, you've got breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And the goal was to keep people there as long as humanly possible, working sometimes 14, 16-hour days. And then they would ride the bus home and turn around and do it. So that's the culture that came out of that, is this hard driving, intense culture of long hours. Like engineers are known for working and sleeping under their desk. That was very true.
Like, I wonder if there's
very true.
Do you think there's evidence to support that is more productive?
Well, here's what happens is, and this is why it happens, is you get $1 million and VCs are smart. Angel investors used to do this. Now it's pretty much VCs. VCs give you enough money that you have to run out in a year. So the goal is in a year, you want to do as much as humanly possible. And so working 16 hours becomes, you know, the idea of build fast and break things. That's how it worked, is you just kept building and building and building. And we're also 20 years removed from how easy it is today. Back then, there weren't all the tools and technologies and integrations that we have today. It wasn't easy. It was a wild west. Everybody was trying to figure out who could be first on an initial idea because there was so many potential possibilities. Everybody was creating a startup. Like literally, I had probably 20 friends that were at different startups because that was the culture.
So when you're referencing Google at this point, you're referencing Google when it was within startup space, like early days.
That. No, it's still like that. But Google and Facebook were really pivotal in influencing the cultures of how startups work once they reach scale. So startups is like 0 to 250, 300. And once you reach about 300 people, you're starting to service enterprise organizations a lot. Okay. Because that's the goal of a startup, is to service an enterprise, because that's where all the money is. And to do that, you have to grow effectively. Well, Google and Facebook spent a tremendous amount of time listening to organizational development and said, when employees are super happy, they are going to produce more. And so if you give them, the slide and the food and the sleep chambers and the back rubs and the laundry services, like they said, and it kept people there at the culture, people just stayed. And that didn't break until COVID happened.
Which is interesting, because I could see, and I'm definitely putting my own bias into this, but sure. I could see how a company in the startup space where employees are there to turn and burn and make a profit could be all in on 16 hours a day and be like, yeah, let's do this so that a year from now we all make a bunch of money on the payout. But exactly. Thinking about just the tech space and being like, let's say at a Google or a Facebook today, I can't see that. To me, I see burnout happening in that environment.
Well, here's the thing is, so when I grew up, and this is probably the largest shift that's happened, especially in Silicon Valley, is when I was in high school, I graduated in 1985. So I was like, technology really didn't exist when I graduated high school. I didn't even have a cell phone. There was no Facebook, there was no social media, there was nothing. So we didn't have the ability to communicate really, really fast. The internet introduced the ability to communicate and educate really fast. So what happened is the cycle of how businesses are built spun up so fast because it created productivity. Like if you work 16 hours a week, you're twice as effective as someone working 8 hours a day because you're getting more done. It's just obvious. But what happened is my generation had the American dream attached to it. Like if you work hard, you're going to create something and you're going to be able to live at the middle class or maybe a little higher. And in Silicon Valley, you may make enough that you could live like people in Los Gatos, having a really nice house, eating out a lot, having a nice car, having a Tesla. I think the value of those things has now waned to such a degree that they're not as accessible now as they were for my generation. I think your generation is coming at the tail end of that, where now it's just churn hard. There is no American dream, but guess what? You may make a little money. It's better than not making money. So it's lost that inertia that my generation had that was pervasive, because we grew up with the belief in the American dream. And I don't know if that exists anymore, especially for your generation.
Right. Yeah. I think that's,
so it takes away the meaning.
I also wonder, because what I wanted to ask about too is if you think it's had any implications in the startup space in general. Like,
yes.
It's like that. It seems like you were there for like this golden age of startups, at least in Silicon Valley.
The golden age is not golden. It was naivete. Nobody knew. Like, here's the thing. I have a lot of friends who did the 18-hour days. They're all divorced. All of them.
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh at that. But
No. It's just, it was the consequence. And we didn't know the consequence in the beginning. Your generation go, I don't want that.
Yeah, right.
And I think that's where we're at is, yes, I can make a shit ton of money, but at what cost to my own soul? And I think we're at a period where your generation is coming up going, well, I don't have the American dream driving me. Like, I don't even know if I should even go to college anymore because Google doesn't require it. So what's the point? What am I working towards? And do I want to work towards something that is increasingly more expensive? Even, it's like you make a lot of money in Silicon Valley, but it's one of the most expensive places to live in the world. So even though you make a ton of money, most people that I know that are making $400,000, they're just getting by because they're having to pay $2.5 million for their house. So where's the balance? when I was coming up, you could buy your house. You can't anymore. It's like, it's too expensive. Your generation can't buy a house. My kids can't buy a house. So that's been one of the bigger differences is I could afford a house. Now houses are way too expensive because it's the primary asset most people have. And if you don't have it, you're kind of screwed because it's so hard to get in. And I think that culture over time wanes on people. And when COVID happened, everybody had to step back, go home, live with their family for 3 months and realize, oh, what the hell am I selling my soul for when this is what I'm doing it for? And I think a lot of people in Silicon Valley woke up and said, I don't want to do this anymore. So, and I think now what is happening is culture, the culture within a lot of corporations is I need work balance. So let me work at home because then I can still have touch points with my family. I can work hard, but I'm still connected. And that's where I think we're moving towards. I think we're in the last stages of companies fighting to keep people in the offices, and a more distributed workforce is less expensive. Offices are expensive. They are.
I was going to say they just
dollar sign.
They're all just sitting on those 10-year contracts. So it's like, if we can just get past those 10-year real estate contracts, maybe things will shift.
Yeah. In 2008, when we had the housing bubble, it was largely on mortgages that were overextended. Most people were way overextended and they really couldn't afford their mortgages. We are now on the cusp of the largest default of commercial property the world has ever seen. So it's going to be interesting. Probably won't affect us less in Silicon Valley, but around in pockets, it probably will, because nobody wants to go back to work. So it's very hard. We're in a unique time. And I think as you're overseas, you're seeing that's the way the world used to live, where they're much more connected to the people in their communities. They're much more connected to the world around them. They go out a lot more. They're less work oriented, and they're still workers. But I think America has been the experiment in how much can we squeeze out of the American worker, and the American worker is going, I can't do that anymore. And now with AI will probably give us 100x productivity increase. And it's the Wild West now. It really is. We're back to the Wild West.
People might be getting that time off they wanted. Maybe just not how they wanted
it. Well, I think here's the interesting thing about AI is you can't bankrupt the people that will buy your product. So they're going to have to solve that problem.
Right. Exactly. Someone has to purchase it.
Exactly.
Is there anything from early days of your career that you feel like the industry has abandoned, but you feel like it shouldn't have?
Gosh, that's an interesting question. And this is a joke, but I would say freehand. That's just a total joke. Freehand was the alternative to Illustrator back in the day, and I liked it better, but the world went to Illustrator. So as a joke, I would say freehand. If anybody who's an old designer, you'll get that one. But no, I think over time, UX has perfected itself tremendously. And it's increased because it's understood the role of research and validation before code. Knowing that that's what outreach did. Outreach knew that if we did the research ahead of time, we're going to solve 90% of the problems that we're going to normally encounter if we just go to code. But if you validate before code, that's the single most valuable thing I think UX has contributed to the entire sphere is do your research before code. So it kind of answers your question the opposite way.
Yeah. But what is your advice then to teams that historically have not validated before code, whether it is from a fundamental philosophy or from short-term planning or whatever reason it may be? What advice do you give to them to improve their process?
Yeah. So Starting a startup is the hardest thing to do. 90% of all startups fail. Why? Because they don't research. I've consulted over the last 15 years with probably 60 or 70 companies. And I can't tell you how many times an owner or a sort of the starting person, the entrepreneur comes in and says, I have a great idea. And their idea is very egocentric because they think they have a great idea. And they may have a great idea. I've seen a lot of really great ideas, but the way they do it is they just come up with the idea and they release it to market. And what UX is teaching us now is that is the worst way to do it. What you want to do is you want to come up with an idea on a paper napkin. You want to raise money. You want to build the team. But before you go to code, because code is the most expensive part of the entire process. So as you build coders are expensive. So if I build a team of 10 people that are coding, when I go to code, that is when the money is burning. And you got to get it right, because if you build and then you go to market and you realize our customers don't want this because it's too complex. Most software is too complex. That's the reason most software fails, is it's too hard to use. And what they don't realize is users, when they start to use a product, they are starting from scratch. So if they hit pain points that make them feel stupid, they will abandon it, even if it's a great product. So most companies don't take in mind the psychological effects of what it means to adopt a product. And that's what I've studied a lot of, is we've got to listen to the psychological ramifications of me trying to use a product, because nobody wants to feel stupid. But when I use a brand new product, I feel stupid. And that's the problem. And so that's how UX can affect it the most, is how do we create the simplest, most intuitive, and most elegant path for our user to accomplish an objective that at the end they go, holy shit, I can do this. And when they do, they'll give you money. And 90% of startups don't listen to that process. They go to code, they release it to market and go, why isn't it working? So, and I think that's changing. I think companies are now realizing what John Kleiner realized: you've got to start with UX.
I love that. I think adding that should be like a company value to the goal of making people not feel stupid, because that taps into psychology, which is what you're saying. But I think so many, my thought is just that so many companies are sales led and marketing led and all about the promise and trying to sell something as opposed to deliver on something. And I feel like what you keep bringing up is this idea of actually delivering on your promises.
Well, here's what I would add to that is, yes, companies want to sell something, but what they don't listen to is, can users actually adopt this product? Is it simple enough for me to get over my own concerns with feeling stupid? Because it's a major part of adoption. Crossing the chasm. So Gordon Moore built this idea of crossing the chasm. You have your early adopters, and then you have a chasm to get to your true customers. Early adopters will pay you for anything. To get over that chasm, so where you can start actually creating, that's a psychological journey. And most people don't understand how psychological being a user is. You know, if like my wife was trying to use a piece of software the other night, and she was getting really frustrated because she couldn't find the download button because it was nested under an ellipsis that she hadn't seen yet. And she was like, what do I do? And that is what most business entrepreneurs fail to see, is that kind of experience. When it happens, they're not going to buy your product.
Right. And if they I completely agree with you. Yeah. I feel like it would be as a researcher, I think it would be fun to intentionally run studies with people who are already frustrated, like from the psychological standpoint of the experience, because we do a lot of sterile research that gives you a much more optimistic perspective than everyday life.
Yeah, most research should be about discovering pain points and validate. So I use research to validate ideas and to discover pain points. And the discovery of pain points is the harder one, because then your customers have to experience the pain. But if you're carrying your customer through that pain journey, you can help them get over that pain. You can learn what's not working, and you can still retain the customer, because then you can carry them through. Like most companies, what they do is they build a really shitty, complicated product, and then they have to back end it with a huge CS team that has to onboard customers. That's the most expensive way to do it, instead of starting in the beginning and go, how do we make this as simple as possible? I have three defining values, and that is simple, intuitive, and elegant. I build for a fourth grader because I want someone who doesn't have a lot of technological value be able to do. And what happens is engineering typically will say, well, we can do this, we can do this. And I said, yes, you can. But will that keep people from adopting your product because it's too complicated? And that's the thing that most engineering-centric companies don't understand, is most engineering-centric companies are building for non-engineering centric users, and there's that massive disconnect, and they don't know why, and then 90% of them fail. So,
but Jonathan, if we don't have a huge customer support team, how can we collect all the complaints to fix the shitty product that we made?
Exactly. And then you have what's called tech debt. Okay.
Yeah.
Tech debt is the cost of changing that bad code and bad design, which you won't do because you don't feel like it brings enough value, because you can always build another feature that can hopefully overcome that. And companies get stuck because they don't want to go backwards. That's why the most expensive part in any startup's world is going to code, and spend as little as money as possible until that moment.
So you mentioned the psychological experience of the user as a key piece of UX, at least from a philosophy standpoint. And I know that you also do some work with, I don't know, I'll let you frame it, but I don't know if it's mentorship or what, but you utilize UX philosophy and principles in everyday life. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. So UX is fundamentally about improvement. And I like to use, I think it's Adam Grant who wrote Atomic Habits. You don't need massive improvements. You need 1% incremental improvements every day. And if you do them every day, just little constant tiny improvements over time, what he says is that you go from flatline to this, and all of a sudden when you're out here, the gap is that big. So the difference is massive. UX is really the process of continual improvement to remove pain. Well, guess what? As a human being, we're doing the same thing. We're trying to remove the pain from our life so that we can have more enjoyment. And so I have over time built what I call the UX mindset. And it's the idea that I am constantly incrementally improving by changing protocols in my own life that support my own growth. So how am I dealing with my own fear? Because fear is, that's probably the biggest area where our own user journey, because as a human being, we have a user journey. Our goal is to improve that, and we can. So we do that because science is now learning. Let me back up a little. My generation started and has been taught historically what's called genetic predisposition. Oh, shoot, I forget the word, but it's essentially you are defined by your genes. We are now realizing that's not true.
Genetic predisposition.
It's not predisposition, but you get the idea. It's the same idea. Now we're realizing we have what's called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is only about 20 years old. And we're realizing, no, even though I'm in my 50s, I still can rewire my brain. And I do it incrementally. You can't change habits massively. You change them in small ways. So the UX mindset is this idea that I'm continually incrementally improving my life. And really the core of it is shifting from fear to gratitude. That's probably the simplest step that I could give anybody. Is your brain cannot live in in two states at one time. So if you're in fear, you are not in gratitude. And if you're in gratitude, you can't be in fear. So I have been incrementally over the last 15, 20 years, slowly training my body to wake up, start with gratitude, keep gratitude going as long as possible. So I develop a habit. It takes 90 days to rewire neurologically your brain. So it becomes a clear habit. And if you do it 90 days straight, that's all. It becomes a habit, and then your body will do it automatically. And I wake up now, and the first thing I do is I look out my window, I look at the sunrise. My body just wakes up at 6. And I just start with gratitude. And it begins the rest of the day. And you'd be surprised what gratitude does to the body, because it puts you in a state of enjoyment. And that becomes the outcome of my day most days. Is I'm not worried. I'm in a state of appreciation, which is very now driven. I want to live right here now. I don't want to worry about the future or regret the past. I want to live today. And gratitude is the very best way of doing that, is just stay grounded in gratitude.
And so, okay, so what I want to ask is, people often say that fear is a strong motivator. And so how do you discuss gratitude in relation to motivation? Because I could see someone making an argument that gratitude mindset could lead to complacency. So if like, how do you reconcile that?
Yeah. So fear is false evidence appearing real. It's essentially, it's a construct of the mind that something wrong is going to happen to me. But guess what? Science now teaches us that 7 out of 8 things that you worry about never even come true. And the one thing that you worried about is 1/3 better than you even imagined it. So what are we worrying about? Fear is a construct that we've learned over time that we think is a good motivator, but it's a terrible motivator, because it typically drives us towards the things we don't even really want. We just think we want. Whereas gratitude says, I'm going to appreciate what I already have. I'm going to find the things that are awesome, even in the midst of the suck, because they're still there. And when I focus on the really good things, my body is not responding to the negative things. And the reason why I don't believe fear is a good motivator is because it's a negative frequency in your body. So its primary output is to put you in a fight or flight state. And that's not a good place to be. That's not homeostasis. Whereas gratitude moves you towards homeostasis so you can relax. And then your prefrontal cortex can come on and learn, oh, that was something I invented. Like, I was worried about that and I didn't need to be. And gratitude helps you see that. So to all your listeners who are in UX, study neuroscience. It's the very best thing you'll ever learn. Study emotional intelligence, because that's really at the core of all UX. User experience is a use. It's an experience in the body with software or with products. And the more you learn how that physiologically happens, what's going on up here and in your body, the more you'll be able to understand your customer and be able to create solutions that are valuable for them. So,
yeah, I also think fear is, and I'm speaking out of my own knowledge here, but I feel like fear is reactionary. Whereas I'm wondering if gratitude, so I'm wondering if a gratitude mindset could be more proactive, actually, potentially.
Well, here's why I find gratitude more fulfilling, is because when I wake up and I start at this point, it's a habit for me where I start with gratitude and I stay in that vein. If I start from fear, my body's on high alert. So fear is the state where I am waiting for some kind of impending doom. And that puts your body automatically into fight or flight state. So what's happening in that moment is your body's releasing a ton of cortisol, okay, which inflames your body. So that's what cortisol does, is it anesthetizes areas so that you can focus on the things that will keep you alive in a survival state. If you live that fear state long term, your body becomes completely inflamed, and that creates disease. So fear is good in short bursts, but not good over a long extended period of times. Because like if I'm being attacked by a tiger, I need to run. I don't need to stop and think about it and be grateful for the tiger. I need to run. So fear serves a good purpose in short stints, not over long periods of time. So it does have value. I think that's its biological purpose, is the fight or flight mechanism is valuable in right doses.
Or at least historically it had much more value than maybe it needs to have today.
We're alive because people figured out a way to survive. Yeah, it has value. It absolutely does. I just think long term, I don't want to live in a state of fear and constant waiting for some impending doom. That's not a valuable way to live. So,
of course, yeah. Are there any other UX mindsets or philosophies that you include in this?
Yes, I'm going to give you a couple. Humanity is starting to learn that quantum physics matters. Okay, and your body's an energetic system. So I'm going to give you a tool that I think is probably one of the most valuable tools I've ever learned. It's by a Dr. David Hawkins, who wrote a book called Power versus Force. He wrote a whole library based on this science. Is your body operates on a frequency scale from 0 to 1,000. Okay, and when we understand that most human beings live just below, so on that scale is death is 0. I think it's guilt, shame, fear, doubt, and then you reach 200, and that's where courage starts. Courage is where the positive action starts. So you always have to have courage in order for positive action to take place. Otherwise, you're always reacting. And when you understand that scale, you understand how people operate at different frequencies. So once you reach courage, then you reach hope. Then you reach, I don't remember what the next one is. And then you reach logic. And then at 500, you reach love. When people operate from a state of love, I think gratitude is a state of being in love in the moment with life and just being appreciative. You can start seeing people and users. Like I take all this stuff and I apply it in UX. I can start reading people where they're at. And then I can help them address where they're at. But I can also do it for myself. I can also say, where am I at? Have I reached courage, or am I living in a negative frequency? It's probably one of the most valuable tools I've ever learned. It's called the scale of consciousness. And when you understand it, how people operate in it, you can start saying, oh, now I understand you're living in guilt and shame. Now I can bring different tools. And I see this in our user research all the time. I see where people are at trying to figure out. They're trying to I don't want to look stupid. I don't want to feel silly. I don't want a negative impact, because with the frequency scale below 200 is a negative charge in your body. It's something that releases something that doesn't feel good in your body. So I have a thought. And the second one I would tell you to look at, which brought this idea of the head and the heart together, is Dr. Joe Dispenza. So his work is fundamentally changing how we understand human beings. And he understands the relationship between the head and the heart. The head has a thought, the body has a chemical charge, and that chemical charge operates on Dr. Hawkins' frequency scale such that I can actually control that with my thoughts. And the more you can operate and understand those tools, the more you can use them to your advantage to create a much more valuable life. And because once you're cognizant, but you have to be responsible for your own life in order to change this. Most people live in a disconnected state to say, I don't want to take care. I want everybody else to take care of me. But when you take responsibility for your life, you can use the scale to your advantage.
You'll have to share some resources with me in case anyone wants to check them out. I'll include them in the show notes.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I just have two final questions for you.
Okay.
The first is a question that I ask every guest, and that is, what is a UX or work-related opinion that you may hesitate to share in a meeting?
I don't say this ever, but UX is they're the smartest group in the UX is the smartest group in the company because we have the right tools to get to the right solutions. I would never say that though. Well, it's the data says UX should be leading, and I believe it.
If you actually, if you have any references that you use
I do. I have the data
to make that argument, yeah, will you share that
Yes,
with me so that I can
absolutely.
include that?
Yeah.
And okay, earlier on in the conversation, you talked about how UX is like that. Most teams are set up where UX supports product, but I feel like you've also made this argument that there's research to support the notion that UX should lead. And so, how does that look different than today?
So we're exploring that. We explore that pretty significantly at StreamSets. And what we did is UX initiates all research unless the product manager comes to us and says research. So what we do is we build a journey map. And in our case, in StreamSets, it was 24 stages because we have a pretty complicated product. And we spent almost 3 months building this user journey so that we could pinpoint specific pain points. And what we then do is we go after those pain points. We do a tremendous amount of research on them, go really deep to understand the pain point, and then come up with a solution and then serve it up to product. It's not product led, it was UX led. And that's how we shifted. And what happened is that the product projects that we were developing they sit in a staging area so product managers can go, oh, I want to do, because what a lot of product managers do is they'll go to the customer and say, what will close the deal? And that's not a good way to develop. That gets you a sale that solves one person's problems. We're trying to do the aggregate pattern that solves everybody's problems. And if we have enough research to validate it, it usually will rise to the top. And that's how we did it at StreamSets. And it worked. We were able to increase revenue by 10x. And so that's what I would recommend to anybody who wants to elevate UX in their own organization. Start doing the research up front for your team so they can see that you know more than they do about the customer and what they want and how to remove those pain points. Because if you can move the dial, so we have on our journey map, we have a dial of 0 to 10 from a pain point. We go after the high pain points. And when you remove those high pain points, you're removing a physiological response in the body because they're not encountering those anymore. And they're able to continue along the journey without any friction. And that's how you shift from engineering led or product led over to UX led, is you start with the research. And that's your job, is knowing what the customer is really thinking and feeling and experiencing on the product journey.
So I mean, again, I'm biased.
Go ahead.
I agree with you. But again, going back to this idea of asking about imperfect scenarios, what do you say to the person who says, why does that need to be UX's responsibility? Why can't product? Why can't right? But why can
product doesn't do research? They don't. They've never had a function to do research well, and UX brought that along. UX said, no, you need the research to talk to your customer. We need Procter and Gamble were really the ones that sort of perfected the whole research process. So you could say in that regard, it came out of product, but UX took it and magnified it probably a lot more and made it central. And I would say, I don't think all UX teams do this either. I don't think all UX teams research intently up front before code. They usually research after code at a usability standpoint because the product's already developed.
Yeah. I just think, I mean, I could continue to talk about this topic for a while because I think there's a large conversation around ownership of those sorts of discovery responsibilities. And I think you have my theory on it is that UX continues to be told that you need to be more business minded and more focused on business. And so they're growing in that direction. And I think product has been led to believe they need to be more user focused and user centric. And so they're growing in that direction. And so in terms of a Venn diagram of responsibilities, you're seeing more and more overlap between expectations of ownership. And so that's why I ask the question a lot, because I like to hear people talk about how to navigate that murky space.
And it exists everywhere. Most companies operate first from a business dynamic, not a UX or product dynamic. They want to sell money. They want to create revenue. That's the driver. That's why, well, my first argument to anybody in UX is start with the data. So and I'll send you the research study that they've already done the research. UX has the highest level of impact on revenue. So start there. John Kleiner got it. He got it. He understood it. You've got to start with UX, because when you do, you're going to listen to the customer the most. Outreach understood it. When you listen to the customer, you're going to move faster because you're not dealing with pain points that come from really bad ideas because they were vetted out of the process. And UX is the one UX is the role that's designed to keep their eyes on the customer. Product is not. Product's responsibility is to the business.
But how do you quantify the value of removing an obstacle before it becomes a problem? You know what I mean? Like, I do think there's
it because your customer won't buy your product.
No, but I mean, right, if a UX team is doing this proper research process up front, like you're describing, and they're removing all these obstacles out of the way of what would have been built into the code potentially, that is, you could argue, a money saver, a cost reduction. There is revenue there, like maybe like in terms of cost savings. That is more difficult to quantify, I think, the savings that happens through the proper UX process, as opposed to like putting a monetary value on landing a deal, landing a sale. Like that is clear.
Oh, absolutely. Revenue. Most companies the reason why most companies go out of business is because they try that. They go after what closes the sale rather than what does the aggregate customer, because here's the thing, if I get one sale, awesome. How long is that going to last? It's probably going to last you 6 months. And if I don't close another customer, I'm going to be in a shithole. So instead of doing one-offs, and most companies are driven by sales, it's the fact, but the data says that is not the most valuable path. All I did was said, I'm going to trust the data. I don't care what other companies do, but in my companies that I work at, I research the shit out of this because I know the data tells me we're going to make the most impact. So I'm going to keep trying to prove that true. And guess what? Every time I've done that right, it's always been proven true. We grew 10x because we listened to the pain points of the customer. We removed them so they could. When I first started StreamSets, we had a 2-week installation process that was fully managed by CS. And then we got it down to 5 minutes, fully done by the customer.
Oh, wow.
And then we just rocket ship, because that's the way it works. When you make it easier to use your product, it's not about closing sales. Sales will close when you make it easier to use your product. Simple, intuitive, and elegant. That's all you need. And customers will come. Like if you build it right, they will come.
Oh, they had it wrong in Field of Dreams. Right. No, I mean, you're preaching to the choir here. I'm sold on. I agree with you. I just think
we in UX all know. I think we all know this because we work with customers enough to know that, hey, they're human beings. They're not customers. They're human beings first. And that's why I said the most valuable things that I ever learned are neuroscience and quantum physics, because those are human biology elements that the more that I empathize with my customer, the more that I listen to them and treat them like a human being, not a cash register, the more that I'm able to actually give them really good solutions, because I'm tailoring it to their humanity, not to my revenue stream. And guess what? When you tailor it to their humanity and remove all those obstacles, the revenue comes. And I've proven it twice in both companies that I've worked at.
I'm speaking anecdotally from my own experience. So I'm taking off my research hat and putting on my user hat. But it is, I've noticed for myself, when someone makes something easy that historically has not felt easy, that is a game changer in terms of how I perceive the product or the company or whatever.
Yeah. So here's another piece of data for you. The 6 fastest growing products in history from user adoption, all were the simplest products to use. So ChatGPT, simple prompt. They made one of the most powerful technologies in the world have a text field. That was it. That was it. Like, it was so mind-blowingly simple because you could play. And that's how the fastest growing products in history, Robinhood is another example. They said most Gen Z and millennials don't care about all of the derivative crap and all of the different measurements. They want the ability to buy stock. So they made the process as simple as humanly possible. And they were the fastest financial platform ever built. Simple always works towards adoption. It's not complexity. Complexity comes with time. So start simple and move towards complexity, because once I believe I can use your product, I'm willing to challenge and learn anything. But if I can't get over that initial hump, I won't adopt anything.
Yep. Okay. My last question for you is just a question from a mentee. And their question for you is, what makes a great boss or manager?
Someone who cares about their people. I spend most of my time appreciating my people. That's the vast majority. People show up every day with life hanging on their shoulders. They don't need someone going, why aren't you doing your work? I spend most of my time telling the rest of my team's rock stars. They are. And they, guess what? When I believe they're rock stars, they become rock stars. So I spend most of my time believing in my team that they're going to surpass me. I don't care if they surpass me. I want my team to surpass me. I'm not worried about being in front. I've done well in life. I want to now see, I'm at a point in my career too, where I want to see my teams grow. But the number one leadership, so I have an master's in organizational leadership. And the number one thing they'll teach you in masters of organizational leadership is love people. It's really that simple. Love people.
You should not have saved that little nugget for the end. I'm very interested in what you've learned in a master's program for organizational leadership.
Yeah. And well, I'll give you the simple translation of how they translate it. It comes from servanthood. Serve the people you work with, and you'll never be without a job.
So how do you show that appreciation for your reports or your team and foster their growth at the same time?
Yeah. I give them opportunities they're not prepared for. And I throw my people in the deep end all the time. And I say, swim, because you can. Because most people don't believe they can do things. They start with an idea they can't. And I believe they can, because as human beings, we can do virtually anything. But they can't learn how to do it until they are in the deep end. So I've got to give them projects. Like I have a new hire. She was an intern last summer. She became a rock star. Like, we worked really hard to find the right person, but she is a rock star. And this summer I threw her into a massive research project because I wanted her to learn the balance. She's a designer and I wanted her to learn research. And I said, my research colleague is going to mentor her, but I said, I want you to lead this. And she's like, okay. But she said okay because she knows I believe in her for a solid year. And so she just finished and she kicked ass. People rise to the level of your belief in them and they fall to your level of disgust in them. And so I spend all of my time appreciating them, believing in them, and telling them, no, you can, when they don't think they can. And then they discover they can, and they go, oh, thank you. It's like, and then when we all get together, we're all having a good time because we're all believing in each other, and it creates an amazing cultural environment.
Yeah, I really like the point you made, or what I took away from the point you were making is that she believes that you support her and
Absolutely.
She trusts you, and
yes.
having
it's
those
called psychological safety. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think people often skip that step of fostering psychological safety and then continuing to keep it, because I think that often it's really easy to lose trust in a hierarchical relationship. And so creating real trust, I think, is actually more difficult than often we make it out to be.
It is. And here's how I would respond to that is I think I've learned to believe in the process of UX that it will pay off 10x. And every time I've done it the right way, we 10x'd. Like, I just followed what research told me and it happened. So now I believe that it's happened. And every time I keep doing that, it keeps happening. So my power is in believing what the research tells me. That if we listen to the customer, we remove their pain points, we take care of them psychologically, they will buy our product because they can get to the aha. And then my job is taken care of. Like my bosses are happy with me because we're growing. And there are times when that isn't true, because like with StreamSets, after COVID, we hit a cash crunch. And so we didn't have the resources to do all of the fabulous ideas. And so now at IBM, we do have the resources, so we're able to address all those. But there are times when you have to kind of slog through the down periods. But if you believe in the process that UX can solve the problem, revenue is inevitable. If you have a good idea, you got to have a good idea to start with, but like you can't have a bad idea, but UX will prove that your idea is a bad idea. So listen to it.
Right.
So,
right. The idea might evolve over time, right? Through that process. Yeah.
Yeah.
John, if someone wanted to reach out to you on the internet, would that be okay?
Yeah. The best place is to find me on LinkedIn. It's probably the best place to connect with me. And I'm also on Instagram. And I am in the process of developing a UX bootcamp called UX Mindset. So if anybody's interested, please get in touch with me. I'm looking for some initial candidates. And I'm at a point where I want to start teaching these things to other people. And so I'm beginning to codify them. I've developed most of the videos that are going to go into the program. And I'm at a point in my career where I would love to see the next generation bloom and make UX, to take UX to the next level. I think I've been part of a group that sort of ushered in UX. I want to see the next generation take UX to new heights. And I do think it's inevitable. I think your generation is going to take UX because UX works. It does.
Okay. Well, I will drop links to both your LinkedIn as well as to any resources you can provide me for
Absolutely.
your bootcamp in the show notes.
Absolutely.
And have a great rest of your day.
Awesome. It was a pleasure. Thanks, brother.